Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for letting me speak here today about the work that we've been doing, visualizing virtual landscapes. This is kind of foreign territory for me, presenting at this sort of a symposium. I'm normally in rooms full of ecologists talking about, slugs and beetles and things like that, or in rooms of computer scientists talking about statistics and things like that. So this is quite a nice experience for me, and it's been wonderful looking sort of behind the curtain at the other talks that were coming into that SharePoint folder. Some really just fantastic stuff. Really looking forward to hearing more about it tomorrow and later today as well. So I want to tell you a bit about who I am and what we do day to day, and then I'll take you through a story of how I came to build virtual worlds in Minecraft and gaming engines. So I work at an institute called the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which is based in Wallingford between Oxford and Reading. And within that, there's a department called the Biological Records Centre. The Biological Records Centre has been around for about 60 years, and it supports volunteer natural history recording schemes and societies in the UK. So these are people like the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, the Ladybird Survey, the British Dragonfly Survey, volunteer-run organisations of people who are really passionate about natural history and spend their weekends and holidays going around recording wildlife. And we work with them, us as a sort of body of academics, to help them use that data to understand how wildlife is changing in the UK over time. And the UK is really privileged in that we have a long running history of natural history going back hundreds of years. And so we're quite uniquely placed globally to be able to say how the flora and fauna in our landscape has changed over time. So as I say, we've been around, this figure's quite old, so we've been around for about 60 years now. And we've got a team of about 20 staff, and we write papers and we help curate these it's now almost 200 million observations, individual observations of wildlife in the UK. And we use these to inform government policy and write papers about how wildlife is changing and why it's changing. So if you ever see headlines, 20% of bees in decline, or particularly a good year for marbled white butterfly, that quite often comes through our research team. But all of this built on a huge army of volunteer naturalists. One headline you can't have escaped would have been the decline in pollinating insects. And this has been really quite marked decline and thought to be as a result of change in farming practices primarily. So this is a real big concern for us. And we need to think hard about how we live our lives into the future in a way that we can sustainably feed ourselves and have a sustainable farming industry, but have one that also supports the biodiversity that shares the landscapes we live in. And with a particular focus for us tends to be on pollinating insects. So we have a project which looks at this, and it's called ePlanner, and I don't want to go into it in too much detail, but I wanted to show you the sorts of visualizations we would traditionally do when trying to talk to people about the landscape and how the landscape might change. So this visualization is interactive on the web, and it's got lots of buttons and sliders at the bottom that you can play with, and you can basically create new scenarios of the future. So you say, in the future, on the far left, in the future, there will be more agriculture, or there'll be more grassland. You want to have it the same as intensity, or more intensive, or extensive, or diverse. And you can choose all these things, basically plan the future, and then this map will change, as will the graphs, and it'll tell you what that future will be like. So here we've chosen a very intensive future where all we care about is feeding the UK and nothing else. And we essentially have two crops, oilseed rape and winter cereals. These create the most calorie content basically per hectare, not good for biodiversity. And you see pollinator richness is predicted to decline. The natural enemies, things that eat the pests of crops, decline. You've got pollution, nitrogen runoff, phosphorus runoff all go down, increase, which is a bad thing. And at the same time, you've got increased calorie production, which is all we care about in this scenario, and increased income. So this is sort of a a worst case scenario for biodiversity. But you can play around with these settings and you can sort of reimagine those landscapes in different farming futures. So this is sort of the data that I work with day to day, but what I was interested in is how I can communicate these results to a younger audience, young families really. And I'm a bit of a gamer, and I think I'm probably a bit more of a kid inside than most people. So how do we translate these stories into something that's going to speak to or be easily understood and engaged with by kids and young families? When you look at these maps that we produce, they are pixels, right? They're made up of pixels, and we call these raster maps. When you zoom into these maps on the left, you get this little figure on the right, and it's all made up of pixels. And another thing that's made up of pixels is Minecraft. So Minecraft is made up of blocks. So you can easily translate this image on the left, which is a map of different habitats. The different colors represent different habitats, onto a blocky landscape here on the right. So, oh, I just stopped sharing. Hold on. Click the wrong button. Let me start sharing again. All right, next slide. So this is what we did. So this is a Minecraft world built using a European digital elevation model. So its elevation is calculated from satellites. It's a big open data set. We then put down a simple base layer of habitat, grass when it's low altitude, snow in the high altitude. We then pull in rivers. You see on the far left-hand side, we've got rivers. That's from a European open data set. Then CEH, where I work, we have a map of all farmland and urban areas. So we put that down. We can add vegetation. So we've got plants and things growing on the sides of the hills. We also have data about what crops grow in which fields, so we can lay that on top. So now you've got different crops in different fields. We know where the cattle are, which fields they're in, so we can put cattle down now on those fields. We can use the National Forest Inventory to get where the wood trees should be and what kind of trees should be where, so we put those down. We know where urban and suburban is, so we've got suburban as brown buildings, urban is grey, so we put them in. Then we can kind of randomize those buildings. That is a bit more sort of realism to the picture. Then we can add in the rows, the black lines on the ground. Those from OpenStreetMap, that's another open data set. And then we can change landscape. So this is the crops as they are today. And then we can imagine an agricultural intensified landscape. Now we've only got two types of crops dominating the landscape, or a diversified future where we have lots of different crops growing in different places. When it becomes intensified, you also get grassland, so land that's previously used for grazing cattle and things like that, gets converted into agricultural crops. So we created these maps in Minecraft, and we also added a VR element to them. So you could had a little roller coaster which would go around the landscape. So this is up in Scotland. You start up in the hills. You put on these headsets, and what we would do is we would have kids sort of ride around in this as we talk to them about what they're viewing. So in this part of the map, we've got a sort of normal farming system, a few different fields scattered about, some cattle. And then as they move down to the far end of the map, we move to sort of more intensified version, where we've got these really large fields of wheat and really large fields of oilseed rape. And we talk about how this sort of monoculture really doesn't support a good diverse biodiversity, and it reduces the number of natural predators, the animals that naturally eat the pests of these crops, and that results in a requirement to put on more pesticides. So we took this to a couple of shows, and we found that it was really, really popular with kids. I mean, unsurprisingly, really, we're hooking off that brand of Minecraft that kids are obsessed with, the second most popular game of all time behind Tetris. So we found it was a really comfortable environment for kids to use and to explore this world, and to talk about the sort of stories that we want to talk about, how the future landscapes are going to change and what impact that might have on biodiversity. We also found that it was a really good way to engage the adults accompanying children. Once you've got their kids out there playing with the game, the adults want to get sucked in as well. So that was a really useful kind of way to engage with the adults as well. The kids were really easily understood the landscape features, even though it's kind of abstracted through Minecraft, because they're familiar with that sort of Minecraft world, Minecraft habitats. They didn't seem to have too much of a problem understanding that, even though it was sort of, you know, abstracted. And the code and stuff, for anyone who's techie in the audience, we used Python and R code. The majority of that is available on this GitHub repository, and I'm very happy for anyone to contact me who wants to talk more about it. We have done some collaborations since with other organizations. Right, let me move along here. So this project sort of became a bit of a victim of its own success. It was all done on a £2,000 budget and on a lot of weekends and evenings. And it started getting rolled out at different events in the organization. And this is Sir Mark Walport, the man with the handsome moustache. And he is the head, or was the head, of UKRI, so the head of the funding organization that oversees many of the other funding organizations in the UK. And I don't think this landed with him particularly well. And that's not surprising, because it's, you know, we use Minecraft because that's a hook into you know, what kids and young adults, it's a world that they're familiar with, not one that Sir Mark is particularly well familiar with. So it's kind of no surprise that you know, he said no to putting on the VR headset, although his assistant did have a go. So we're sort of thinking about how do we go on from here into something that's more realistic. So apologies if this video is a little bit jumpy, but this is using the Unity gaming engine. So it's taking all the same concepts as the Minecraft idea, except it's translating it into a much more realistic visualization of the world. Let me go to the next slide. There we go. So you can have sort of realistic cattle and stuff, and you can program the cattle as to how they're going to move around the landscape and how they're going to eat and feed. We have bird song in the woodlands, and this bird song, we can put in the bird species we know that occupy that woodland. We can have more or less bird song depending on the quality of that woodland. And what we found is that soundscape is really important for giving that immersive feeling and realism to these landscapes. We can have buzzing insects near to the pollinator habitats that the farmers might create, and we can have a dearth of insect noise in the center of these large arable fields. And so it really allows us to explore these future landscapes, but in a much more realistic way. It's more appropriate for our audience. And here we're really talking about policymakers, we're talking about farmers as well, and landowners who are trying to imagine how they might manage their landscapes in the future. And we're also looking at how we have another project coming up looking at how people interact with woodlands and woodlands of the future. And the plan there is to embed narrators in the environment. So as you approach woodlands, or as you approach features in this landscape, you can hear stories from people about the places that you're seeing, whether they work there, they live there, or they've experienced this place for you know, generations. So really excited about the different avenues that we can go with this. I think there's sort of reflecting on both these projects and the advantages they have for us in terms of communication. They allow us to create landscapes that are personal. So with both of these techniques, we can create them anywhere in the UK, because we have satellite data and the driving data behind these visualizations for anywhere in the UK. So we can build them, you know, for your city, for your farm, for your village, for your town. And that sense of place is really important, I think, when you're engaging with these. It becomes much more personal when you see these changes. The second thing is the ability to visualize large changes in a short period of time. So we have this idea of shifting benchmarks. So we all benchmark the natural world on the natural world of our youth. But the natural world of our youth is vastly different from the natural world of our parents' youth. And using these sorts of virtual landscapes, we can span that time very quickly and show how landscape has changed or will change. And I think that can be really quite impactful. Like I said, I think soundscapes, as we started to get into the application of soundscapes in the Unity engine, I think that's really important and really impactful. Something about that bird song, and I'm not an ornithologist and I'm not good with my bird song, but you will know the sound of a woodland by the birds that are there, whether or not you know what those birds are. When you hear them, you will know that you're in a woodland because of those species. And it really helps to bring these landscapes to life. And I've talked as well about our plans to embed narrators, and I think it's a really really promising way to put sort of voices of the various stakeholders of the landscapes embedded in these sorts of virtual environments. So I'd just like to just finish by thanking the other people who are involved. So Gary Powney and Reto Schmucki, who are both at UKCEH, were really helpful in bringing all this data together and helping me to get all the code and stuff sorted. And Toran Richards, who has his own business called Significant Gravitas, and he's the one who's working us with it on these new environmental landscapes. And thank you all for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you all more as the day and symposium goes on. Thanks so much.